Artisan Sourdough Hearth Bread. This is a lean bread. Very crusty with a tender, creamy well-developed crumb. And only 3 ingredients: flour, water and salt. These gorgeous Dutch oven sourdough breads are very flavorful and crusty. This recipe is a good start for new sourdough bakers. It's a long process but an easy one. These breads are so worth it. Before I move on in this video, would you like to know exactly what you need to lose fat and get healthy without giving up your favorite foods or starving yourself? If your answer is yes, I have developed a 60-day personal keto diet, which would be fully customized as per your gender, age, height, and weight. The customized keto diet is available absolutely free, but only for a limited time. I assure you that this customized diet will help you lose at least 20 pounds in the next 28 days. Click on the first link in the description to grab your customized keto diet now. Artisan Sourdough Bread Recipe. Ingredients. For the dough, 525 grams water 80° Fahrenheit. No chlorine, 2.22 cups. 20 grams salt or 1 tablespoon maximum. Different salts might weigh out differently, they will also have different volumes, so don't go overboard. 200 grams very active starter, make sure it floats, 1+ cup. 700 grams all-purpose flour or bread flour, 5 1/2 cups. Instructions. Make the starter ahead, this can take up to a week or more, and do not use until it is active enough to float a teaspoon on a cup of water. Sourdough starter. Make the dough. Pour the water into a large bowl. Add the ripe starter to the water and mix thoroughly with a whisk or by hand until the floating cloud of starter is mixed completely into the water. Add the flour to the leavened water and mix with the dough bowl scraper or other spatula. At the end, use wet hands to form a shaggy dough ball. Sourdough shaggy ball stage. Autolyse. Let it rest autolyse stage about an hour. This stage can be extended without worry up to 4 hours. After autolyse, add the salt to the bread dough. Use your hands to pinch and stretch the dough gently until the salt is mixed into the dough. Adding the salt and water. Stretch and fold. Using your wet hands, pull the dough from under the dough ball up and stretch it gently as you pull it over the dough ball top. Release and repeat this process as you give the bowl quarter turns until the dough is stretched and pulled from each quarter of the bowl. First stretch and fold. Over the next 2.5 hours, repeat the stretch and fold every 30 minutes for a total of 4 times. The dough will change from a slimy ropey mass to a billowy dough with many air pockets and definite body as you stretch and fold it. Do not punch down the dough at any time. Those air bubbles create the excellent crumb and flavor. The dough should become an elastic, resilient dough that passes the window pane test. If your dough is still breaking before it goes transparent when pulled, do another stretch and fold. Window pane test, last stretch and fold. Bulk rise. Allow the dough to bulk rise in the bowl at room temperature an hour or so until it rises by 30% or so. Cover the bowl of dough with a plastic bag and set it in the fridge for 12 to 15 hours or overnight. It should continue to rise slowly, so give it room in the bowl. Remove the dough from the fridge and let it sit on the counter in the bowl for 2 hours or until the dough reaches room temperature or pretty close. The dough will soften and gently rise a tiny bit as it warms. Divide and bench rest the dough. On a clean unfloured counter, pour out the dough into a large mass. Flour the top of the dough lightly but evenly. Being careful not to overwork the dough, form each half into a dough ball. The most efficient way to do this is to use the counter as your pivot point. Scrape in a circle around the dough, leave it unturned, flour side up. The unfloured counter will hold the dough center and create tension as you circle the dough with the scraper, forming a ball. Repeat to form 2 dough balls. The dough edge should be round and the dough ball should have some form and resilience to it. Bench rest sourdough. Let the dough balls rest for 20 to 30 minutes. They will spread out but should not fall off at the edge of the pancake. If they do, reform the loaves and bench rest them again to build the structure of the dough better. Final shape and rise. Gently slide the dough scraper under one of your dough balls and flip it over so it rests on the floured side. Now gently stretch and pull the dough over from the bottom to 1/3 up the loaf. Stretch and pull the dough from the sides to the dough middle. For the final stretch, take the dough from the top of the ball and pull it all the way down to the bottom. Form a seam. Pinching the seam as necessary. Place the dough seam side up in your rice-floured, cloth-lined banneton or bowl. Rise in the fridge 2 to 4 hours. Baking instructions. Set a baking stone, if you have one, on your oven bottom rack. Set your Dutch oven with its lid on next rack up, lower third of oven. Preheat oven to 450 degrees Fahrenheit for at least 30 minutes. Keep the formed loaf in your banneton in the fridge until you actually need to place it in your preheated Dutch oven. Cold dough will aid the oven spring. Remove one banneton from the fridge. Place the dough in your preheated Dutch oven. Alternate method. Place high-heat safe parchment paper over the banneton. Turn the banneton upside down so the dough falls gently onto the parchment paper. Score the loaf with your lame knife or a razor blade or sharp scissors. Scoring helps the dough rise better. Now pick up the scored loaf with the edges of the parchment paper, if using, and gently and carefully place it into your very hot Dutch oven. Put the lid on the Dutch oven and return it covered to your preheated oven. Bake 30 minutes at 450 degrees. Now remove the lid, and parchment paper if using. Steam should come out. Hopefully the bread is a light golden color with a nice rise and set crust. Bake an additional 10 minutes uncovered or until the loaf thumps hollowly and the surface gets dark, caramelized darker than you are used to maybe, and the scored areas look shiny. To prevent overbrowning, turn the parchment paper, or foil, upside down over the loaf as it finishes in the oven. Remove the Dutch oven. Place the finished loaf on a cooling rack. Do not cut it for at least an hour to set the crumb. Return the Dutch oven, with its lid on, to the oven at 450 degrees Fahrenheit and preheat for 15 minutes. Repeat the process with the remaining loaf. To tell if your bread is properly done, use your digital thermometer and insert it into the center of the loaf. It should read about 205 degrees. Look at the crust and listen to it cool. The crust should be shattery, which means as it cools it will crack. You can see it and hear it. This is bread music. Also, a dull-sounding bread is probably not completely baked. When you cut the loaf, it should have a creamy but springy crumb with lots of aeration. Notes. Watch your dough as it goes through the stages of fermentation. This dough can easily over-ferment at high room, or oven-proofing, temperatures. If your dough gets slack, unworkable and won't form or rise, it is probably over-fermented. To avoid over-fermentation, keep the room temperature, or oven, at 80 degrees or less. Whatever flour you are using will influence this process. Learn to work with the dough you are creating. This bread freezes very well. After it is completely cooled, double wrap it tightly with plastic wrap and set in the freezer. For best results, store your sourdough bread loaves in a bread box. I use my Dutch oven with the lid slightly cocked. That beautiful crunchy sourdough crust gets soft in an airtight container or plastic sack. Once cut, just set the bread cut side down to protect the crumb. These loaves hold very well for at least 3 days. Freeze the other finished loaf if you can't eat it right away. In this channel, I always come up with different low-carb and keto diet recipes to help people find innovative and new ways to reduce weight. Definitely try it on your own and let me know your feedback in the comment section below. Also, don't forget to grab your free customized keto plan from the link in description. Subscribe to my channel, The Keto World, for daily low-carb recipes, which would definitely help you shed some of that belly fat. Like and share the recipe with your friends.